Hi everyone. Now, as I'm sure you know, my beekeeping is more to do with bees than selling honey, and I've not very much interest in doing that. However, obviously the bees do produce the honey, and I have to get rid of it. And also come, if you like, to buy stuff for the bees. So I do a couple of local markets. And I think buying things from the sort of farmers market type things is very different to buying things in a shop, fairly obviously. In a shop you go in, you pick it up, you pay for it, you go. At a market, people are more interested in, or at least interested in, the sort of backstory, if you like, of what you're selling. And certainly craftspeople get asked, you know, where do they get the products from, how do they design it, how do they make it, and that sort of thing. And honey certainly has a backstory, with all of the news about how bees are apparently under threat and the impact this could have on pollination and our food supply. People are interested in that sort of thing, so I am often asked all sorts of things about bees and what they're doing and what's happening to them, which is fine. They do tend to be the same questions every it'll be the first time a person has asked it, even though it might have been the 10th time in the day that I've been asked exactly the same question. And you can't ask some of these questions at Tesco's, let's say. So the questions do tend to be the same at every market pretty much, and so this blog is about the 4 main questions that I get asked, the Fab 4. Is your honey local? I get asked this all the time, and I really don't know how to sort of answer it properly. There seem to be sort of 2 problems with the question. First is, what is local? How far away is it? Presumably it's the distance from the bees to the customer, presumably. Is it 1 mile, 5 miles, 10 miles? I don't really know. So I usually ask the customer, now, how far do you think is local? And generally they don't know either. Now, believe it or not, honey has lots of sort of legal definitions to describe it. And the word local isn't one of them. So there's no legal definition of what local is. Now, since I've been doing markets, I've only ever had one guy not buy it because it wasn't local. And this was at a market at Stony Stratford, which is near Milton Keynes and is 24 miles away. Now, I also do a market at Jordan's Mill in Biggleswade, and that's 15 miles away. Also, with honey, there is a type of honey which people are fairly convinced is good for them, and this is Manuka honey, and New Zealand is about 11,600 miles away. Now, if that's good for everybody, is that local? I don't think so. Now, honeybees only fly usually a couple of miles to get their forage, so is that local? Now, I have to say, I have never done a market that's less than 2 miles away from where I am at the moment. So does that mean that none of my honey is local? So, as I said, I don't really sort of answer the question. I just say to people, well, I'm in Ravensden, and I explain people where it is, and pretty much everybody, except the bloke in Stony Stratford, said it. That's fine. The second thing I don't really understand is, what does it matter if it's local? Now, there is this general idea that local honey is good for you, although I don't know what good represents and how you measure it. And I think it's also tied up with this idea of local honey being good for hay fever. Now, it seems to me that honey could be good for somebody if they lived within a couple of miles where the hives are, and then they move, and does it become bad for them? What happens? Now, a thing to bear in mind is that all honeys, wherever they come from, are antibacterial, antifungal and antiviral, and the process that the bees go through to make it means that honey is quite acidic, it has a low water content, and as a result bacteria can't survive on it. So all honeys are good for you, irrespective of where they come from. And I think a more relevant question people ought to ask is, has your honey been mucked around with? Has it been pasteurized? Has it been filtered? Has it been extracted properly? Have things been added to it? It's quite possible that local honey that comes from a couple of miles away could be blended with corn syrup. It could have had all its pollen filtered out of it. I could have added creosote to it. I could have added nuclear waste to it. But if it's local, is it still good for you? I don't know. I don't think that the word local means anything. And a better question, as I said, would be, what have you done to your honey? Which is something perhaps people ought to be asking supermarkets. Is honey good for hay fever? This is a question I get asked all the time, particularly during May and June, to the extent where I almost dread going to markets. Now, usually the question is preceded by, is your honey local? Which we've already had a talk about. As I understand it, the principles behind this is that you eat local honey, which you should be doing from the beginning of the year. Local honey has pollen from local flowers, and these are the flowers that are causing your hay fever. And if you take honey regularly every day, you build up an immunity to hay fever by consuming the pollen. Now, I don't have hay fever myself, and I actually don't know anybody who does, but I have repeated this principle myself many times. But to be honest, after a while it started to make no sense, so I googled a few things and looked into it, and the conclusion I came to is no, it doesn't. And I'm not alone. The NHS also says that there is no cure for hay fever. Or perhaps not the way that you think, in as much that it may be a placebo. Now, because I get asked this so often, I did a blog about it a little while ago, quite a while ago, sort of explaining how the individual parts of it don't really make any sense, and the fact there is no scientific evidence for it. And there'll be a link to that blog somewhere up here once I figure out how to do a YouTube card, and there'll also be a link to it in the description of this blog. Is your honey raw? Now, I'm asked this more and more regularly now, and there are a lot of meaningless, fashionable words that are used to describe honey, pure, natural, healthy, and my favourite is artisan, which I ask the people who use it what it means, and apparently it means it's small scale, although they don't say how small is small. Now, as when I'm asked is my honey local, I never quite know how to answer it, so I ask them what they mean, and it usually implies sort of being uncooked. But when does raw become warmed, becomes cooked, becomes heated, or becomes pasteurized? Now, there are legal regulations that describe honey and what it means, and it says this: Unfortunately, it's the usual useless legislation. There's no exact definition of the temperature of what it is that damages the enzymes. People often think that supermarket honey is pasteurised, and pasteurisation is thought to be at about 65 degrees. So is this the temperature that damages enzymes? Now, when my honey crystallises, which it does, and all honey does, I warm it to 38 degrees, which is just a couple of degrees above the internal temperature of the hive. And I do this for a couple of days. Now, is this warming or heating? Does this stop it being raw? Now, trading standards offices think that the word raw is misleading and shouldn't be used. And recently they said this. Now, a couple of months ago, quite a large sort of honey supplier in the UK, Black Mountain Honey, were told by their trading standards office to remove the word raw from the labels at their website. Now, they have done this, but they are not happy about it. There is a link to their video in the description to this blog, and amongst the various things that hack them off, the main one is that they're not the only ones who use the word raw. Now, there is another shop that sells raw honey. You might have heard of it. It's called Amazon. Now, who's going to take Amazon on? I don't think any trading standards office is going to do it. So, if people ask me, is my honey raw? I say, well, it must be. Otherwise, I'm breaking the law. And I wouldn't do that now, would I? Now, if the warming thing, where it's just heated by a couple of degrees, is considered to be unacceptable, then the outcome of that will be there will be no honey sold anywhere, because crystallization is an entirely natural process and all honey does it. And finally, is your honey organic? Now, as I said, there are lots of fluffy words that don't mean an awful lot, but organic actually has quite a strict interpretation and use. And in the UK, to use the word organic on your products, you've had to have them approved by one of 7 agencies, the biggest of which is the Soil Association, who deal with about 70% of the UK market. And if they approve your product, you can put their logo on your jar and labels, and the requirements you have to meet to be organic are in a 189-page document. Yeah. Now, fortunately, honey only has 6 pages about what the requirements are, and they are based on European legislation. Now, there are a number of problems with these requirements, such as you're not allowed to clip queens. It's considered to be mutilation. Now, this is something that beekeepers can do to control swarming, although I don't do it myself. You can't have inorganic swarms to produce your honey, and I have to say I don't know what inorganic swarms are and how you could possibly tell. And if you are buying in bees, you must use organic bees. Never seen them for sale. Most difficult thing, I think, is that the wax comb that's inside the hives has to be organic. Now, I contacted the biggest provider of beekeeping equipment in this country and probably Europe,
and they said this: not only that, you need to know what crops are being planted in a 12-mile square radius around where your bees are. Don't know how I'm supposed to be able to do that. And the bureaucracy that goes around being certified as organic is frankly unbelievable and completely out of whack for my level of production. Now, perhaps slightly ironically, my bees are on 2 organically certified farms. And one of the farmers, Martin, said that there's no way my honey could ever be considered organic for a variety of different reasons. And Friends of the Earth themselves say it is impossible to get UK organic honey. But you can still buy organic honey from abroad, and apparently what has to happen is that the foreign organic organisations certify that they are meeting the same requirements as say the Soil Association would require. Obviously no overseas government would lie about that sort of thing, would they? Now, one thing really about organic food is it doesn't actually mean it's better for you, although you do see articles suggesting that that is the case. Organic is about the improvement of agricultural processes and methods, that it's better for the land and the animals. And the idea sort of arose back in 1939 when somebody called Lord Northbourne wrote a book about farming. And put forward the idea that a farm should be treated as an organism, as a single entity, and from this the idea of organic arose. So as far as the question, is my honey organic, this is the easiest of the 4 to answer, because the answer is no. So that's it. That's the Fab 4.